everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Dordell. I'm a career coach in the Undergraduate Business Career Center, and I use she, her pronouns. And welcome to our Thursday session of our Standout series, or SOS, on maintaining your motivation. Before we get started, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit about my job search story, given the topic that we're discussing today. One of the responsibilities that I have as a career coach in the UBCC that is super rewarding for me is I supervise our peer career coaches. So, for those of you who've ever had the opportunity to have your resume or a document reviewed by one of our fabulous peer career coaches, I really enjoy working with them. This is a photo of my dog Henry, who has been very excited to have my partner and I home over the past year and a half for the quarantine. And he's made many appearances in my appointments and meetings over the past year. Before I start again with the rest of my topic, I just want to tell you a little bit about my own job search. When I graduated from college, I graduated in 2008. And for those of you who know a little bit of history, about 5 months after I graduated from college, we experienced the Great Recession. Now, I was attending graduate school at the time, so I wasn't immediately impacted. But when I did start my job search after graduate school, there was a hiring freeze at many universities. And by the time graduation rolled around, I had been to many interviews, but I still did not have a job. And sitting at graduation, hearing about all the wonderful places my peers were off to was really disheartening. And I just very specifically have that memory. So I know what many of you are going through. And although I did get a job later that summer, to remember that that was only an 8 week period between graduation and obtaining a job, you would have thought in my mind that it was a year, just because I recognize the stress and the anxiety, especially once you're done with school, looking forward to kind of that next step and maybe it not happening. So, again, just a little bit about my own experience so you have a sense that I do know where you're coming from, even though I am working now. So, I want you to think about this conversation as a combination of a pep talk and some science. I worked in the College of Biological Sciences for 5 years, so I do tend to bring in some research on many of the topics that I'm discussing. And since we're going to be talking about motivation, I think it's really important for us to define what we mean by motivation. And so I'm pulling from a little bit of literature that just looks at how do we define motivation. And really, this article, I think, has a great definition of motivation. Essentially, the inherent tendency to seek out novelty and challenges, to extend and exercise one capabilities, to explore and to learn. And when we think about your job search and the energy that it takes to explore the world of work, I think this is exactly the skill set that we're trying to harness, the ability to extend and exercise your capabilities, to explore and to learn. And Ryan and Deci in their articles talk about kind of two key things that are needed to create an environment to maximize intrinsic motivation. And really what their research showed that the two key pieces that individuals need to maintain their motivation and be in a motivational environment are autonomy and competence. So, in order to really feel motivated in your job search, we really need two things. And that's really what we're going to focus the rest of our talk on is concrete tips and strategies for you to perform your best and feel confident in a given task. And also have the skills to continue to be motivated and feel competent as you continue the job search. So, again, in a nutshell, what does this mean? What are we talking about today? Really, what we're saying is that feeling you have the autonomy to define your job search on your own terms, meaning that you're approaching your job search with strategies that will work for you, specifically based on your personality, your preferences, how you like to gather and interpret information, plus having confidence that you have the skills to conduct a successful job search really will lead to an environment that's conducive to continue to maintaining motivation, even if you feel that you've been doing this for a long time, that you're losing steam. So we're really going to be focusing the rest of our time talking on concrete strategies and tips to look at how you can build more autonomy in defining a job search that works for you, and strategies for building confidence if that has waned over the past 6 months to a year as you've been managing your job search. So a few notes that I want to make before we move forward to be very clear about some other topics and other things that come into the conversation related to motivation is first, this is really hard. I have worked with a lot of students over the past 6 months that as we start our conversation, the first things that they're talking about are feelings of guilt and shame because they feel that they have not put enough time and energy into the job search to be reflective of how much they want a job, and they're feeling guilty about that. This is hard, and I want you to move past the decisions that you've made in the past. What the UBCC cares about and what our coaches care about and our peer career coaches care about is that you're finding that motivation now, and we're here to support you. Secondly, the last year and a half has been incredibly difficult. Beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, we have experienced significant hardships in our community related to racism, systemic challenges. There have been so many difficulties. And so the last year and a half has not necessarily allowed us to create environments for ourselves that really keep us motivated and keep us focused. And so please remember that. And when you add a job search or a skill or a task that you haven't done before, that contributes to this process feeling harder. And that's okay. And finally, your mental health comes first. We can talk about tips and tricks and strategies and excellent cover letters and ways to organize your schedule to make the job search more effective for you. But at the end of the day, this needs to be incorporated into a larger wellness plan. It is well researched and well documented that anxiety and depression have a significant impact on motivation. And so if you think that your mental health may be contributing to the lack of results that you're hoping to see in your commitment to the job search, that's a really important thing to think about and to seek help for. So let's break down our equation that we had at the beginning of this session into smaller parts. So that first half of the equation, feeling you have the autonomy to define your job search on your own terms. So when you think about how you define your autonomy and think about how you want to approach your job search, there's a lot of people involved in this process, right? Although it is largely you and the outcome will affect you the most, there are other people that exist in your world and in your space that are playing a role as you move through this experience. So it's really important to think about who's all involved in this process for you. What is the role of family? What are the role of friends? How do your mentors influence and engage in this process with you? How do your peers play a role in this process? And although we like to think that our circle and our community often has a largely positive influence on our goals and our potentially our job search, it's also possible that these individuals, through no fault of their own, are having a negative influence. And so I think it's really important to consider how are the people in your life really helping you and supporting you and being your champion during this time? And how are they being negative? And is there potentially an action step that you can take to increase the positive influence of your peers and the people around you who are invested and supportive of you to make sure, again, that you have those champions in your corner. And I just want to give you a couple of examples of some things that I've seen over my time working with students to kind of showcase some of this example of how people who care about you, who love you, who are really invested in this process don't always have the most positive influence. But more importantly, what can you do about it? So this example one, my mom is worried about me getting a job. And although I know she cares about me, her worry stresses me out when she asks me every day how my search is going. I may need to have a conversation with her about how she can be supportive with, which will keep me motivated. This is a topic that I have conversations with students about quite frequently. So if you do have family members or peers or other people in your life that you feel are putting pressure on you or dictating or driving your job search in ways that don't feel productive, please consider having a conversation with a career coach to talk about strategies to have those conversations. Our next example, again, I don't think will be that much of a surprise, but I think it's really important to normalize it and name it. There can be a lot of pressure within the Carlson School community, not only on your job search timeline, but the types of roles you apply for, the types of organizations you quote should or shouldn't be proud to be working for. And it's important to really think about what role is that playing and is it contributing positively to my search process or negatively? So this example, I feel a lot of pressure from members of my Carlson school peers to have a job already. When I feel too much pressure, I get anxious and unmotivated. I'm going to limit the time I spend on LinkedIn to 15 minutes 3 times a week. Well, we all know social media has a lot of positive impacts on our world. And frankly, during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we haven't been able to gather, this has been a way that we felt connected. But feeling that sense of connection is not always positive. And I have a lot of conversations with students about LinkedIn and how, while it may be a great job search resource, sometimes it feels doesn't feel so good, or it feels more pressured as we're seeing people make announcements about the things that they are pursuing as they move forward. So I want you to step back and think about the role of social media in your process, and thinking about how you can make sure the time that you're spending on a site like LinkedIn is productive and not counterproductive. So we've talked a little bit about how we can think about our community and the role of creating a positive environment. So now let's think about that second part of the first strategy: how to approach a job search with strategies that work for your personality and preferences. I love having this conversation with students because often there is an unwritten expectation or rule that job searches need to be conducted in a certain way. There's a right way to do it, and then there's not right ways to do it. And I really want to push back and challenge you to think about how can you make your personality and preferences work for you, because that will have a significant contribution in your motivation to do the work. When you're being asked to do things that are out of your preference or maybe feel uncomfortable for you based on personality preferences, you're going to be less motivated to engage in those activities. So here are just a few examples of how our team can work with you to incorporate preferences within your personality, to be more strategic in your job search. So a couple of questions you may want to reflect on and ask yourself. How do you prefer to gather information? Are you someone who is really interested in doing research, could spend all day on various websites, reading and writing and taking notes about the world of work and searching for jobs? Or are you more motivated by learning about the world of work and thinking about your options through conversations, like informational interviews or the lived experiences of others? Um, in what ways do you work more effectively? Are you someone who is more effective when you can schedule large, uninterrupted periods of time where you can really focus, take a deep dive in, and then walk away from that topic when you're not working on it? Or are you someone who is more effective in short bursts of time? Maybe your focus is limited, and being able to spread out your job search over the week in 20-minute chunks of time is going to be more effective for you. Decision making is a huge component in the job search process. Not only do you think about the decisions that you're going to make at the end when you're actually selecting an opportunity, but you're making decisions throughout this process in terms of whether you want to take the time to apply to an opportunity, or whether an opportunity isn't necessarily worthwhile for you to invest that time and energy. So reflect on whether you may have preferences for using logic and a strategic approach to your decision making, or if you're more of a spontaneous person and you tend to trust your gut will tell you. This can be really informative in terms of how you work through the job search process and interpret whether an opportunity will be a good fit for you. Sometimes individuals that tend to rely more on logic and a strategic approach may feel more confident about their decision about whether a job will be a good fit before they even go to an interview, or those who prefer more spontaneous and gut-based approaches to decision making may really need to go through that interview process to see that it feels right. Finally, another thing that I like to talk to students about is how do you prefer to actually make a decision? When do you feel confident? What processes do you go through? Do you prefer to work more internally? So reflect on information and make that decision, and then allow people in your life that you care about to know what you've decided? Or is it really important for you to engage in kind of a dialogue throughout your decision making process? Do you need to talk through your thought process with others before you feel most confident? Again, It's not that everyone strongly fits into one category or the other as we look at these dimensions of gathering information and making decisions, but it's really important to reflect as you're thinking about your job search so far. Are you doing and engaging in the process through preferences that are natural to you? And when we think about motivation and continuing to work through a process that may be going on longer than we expected or that we'd hoped to, really harnessing your preferences will really help create, again, that motivation to continue to do the work to increase your likelihood of getting a job sooner. Now let's move on to the second part of our equation, having confidence that you have the skills to conduct a successful job search. While we can talk about your personality, your preferences for information gathering and decision making, the other factor that creates motivation and an environment conducive to being productive is self confidence, not just self confidence in your own candidacy and your ability to go through the job search process, but confidence that you have the skill sets throughout this process to be successful. And that starts from second one of opening up a job search tool and effectively feeling confident that you can evaluate a job description or put in a keyword that is going to result in a job description that's of interest to you. And so let's talk a little bit about ways that you can build your confidence in this given task, meaning the job search. So a couple of things I'd encourage you to think about. So identifying those keywords through job descriptions, so the skills, tasks, or qualifications that interest you to feel more confident when searching for jobs online. This is a huge piece. I really like to talk about kind of the garbage in, garbage out theory. I know I first learned about it in eighth or ninth grade when we were learning how to use graphing calculators, and that the math was only as good as your ability to put in the information correctly. And so a lot of students lose motivation in the job search because they don't necessarily have strategic keywords that they're using, and they're decreasing the likelihood that they're coming across jobs that they're excited about. So being more strategic in the keywords and how you're searching for jobs can really contribute to hopefulness and motivation. You're more likely to find jobs that you're excited and motivated to apply for. Another thing I encourage you to think about is your, what I like to call your personal rubric. So really, what are your non-negotiables that will help you feel confident about a decision, whether a job is worth spending your time applying for? If you continue to apply for roles that you don't necessarily feel enthusiastic about, are unclear if they're a good fit, or don't necessarily feel that you accurately can evaluate that, that can really decrease your motivation. So, spending the time to think about what are my non negotiables and what are the things that truly aren't worth applying for because it is not going to be a good fit will again increase your motivation, because then you will continue to apply for jobs that really do excite you and not stress or get worn down by applying to opportunities that deep down you know are not necessarily things that are going to be a good fit for you. Finally, getting professional feedback on your application materials and interview prep so that you can make improvements to the things you can control in the process is huge. There are so many things in the job search process that are outside of your control or that you'll have very limited information about. You may not know what an applicant pool looks like. You may not know why you were a finalist, but ultimately someone else was chosen. But one thing you can control is feeling confident that your application materials are strong, that you've done your best to work on your interviewing skill set so that you can present and show evidence of your qualifications for a job. So being able to eliminate that uncertainty about whether those skill sets are strong can really help increase your confidence, and then not take those rejections as personally as you might have otherwise. My colleagues have presented throughout the week on some of these topics more in depth. So if any of them feel like they will be an effective part of your process, make sure to go back and watch those other webinars. Other things that I would really encourage you to consider when creating motivational environments for yourself are some other questions that sometimes don't always come up or are difficult for us to reflect on until someone outside of the situation brings them up. So the first question I like to ask students is, do you need a break? Sometimes it sounds counterintuitive to walk away from the job search when you feel that not having a job is the most stressful thing going on in your life. But the reality is, I have seen time and time again where students needed a break and instead they continue to apply for jobs. And then that feeling of defeatism, potentially a negative attitude because they are overwhelmed or tired, ends up really self sabotaging their search when they get to the interview process. So, if you really feel that taking a week or two off and just stepping away from this process to refresh will rehance your motivation, you are likely to be more successful more quickly. So, definitely something to reflect on. You may also need to consider or explore another approach. Maybe you need to think about working with a staffing agency, or maybe there's some other resources that you're unaware of that might be helpful to refresh and restart your search. Maybe you recognize, wow, I've been doing all this web based research, but I actually am someone who learns best and gets more enthusiastic about learning when I'm engaging with others. Maybe I really need to start incorporating more networking into my job search, and that will motivate me for when I'm sitting in front of my computer attempting to apply for jobs. Another thing that I like to bring up is talking to someone who's less invested in your job search. Again, our previous examples, we talked about who's in your corner, who's in your community, and who are your support systems. But sometimes those people who are super close to you, super invested in you, and really want to see you succeed often bring big emotions that can often contribute to more stress on you as the job seeker. So think about how you can incorporate other people who can be supportive and champions for you, but maybe aren't so directly impacted by the outcome. Something I like to jokingly say to students is, the best thing that I can tell you is I don't care what you do. And while I care about you and I hope for success, I can really, as well as my other colleagues, can really be one of those outside people that can really help you process things while not necessarily bringing big emotions into the conversation. So, therapists, mentors, supervisors, those are other people that you may want to consider bringing into the conversation if you're not actively incorporating them into your job search approach. The other thing I also like to talk about is, do you need to set more reasonable goals for yourself? So sometimes students set themselves up to fail because they set unrealistic goals that are really difficult to maintain. And again, the goal is to maintain motivation over a long period of time. So a good example of this is sometimes students will set their goals based on the number of jobs they want to apply to, and why I think that's not necessarily always the most effective strategy is based on something we've already talked about. What if there aren't 5 jobs you're enthusiastic about applying for? And you apply for 5 jobs every day. What if you apply for 5 jobs every day and 3 of those days out of that week, 5 of those jobs weren't something you were qualified for? So think about resetting your goals to chunks of time. I will schedule 5 hours a week to dedicate to something productive in my search. And then you can really increase the variety of things that you're doing. Consider how networking, creating informational interviews, reading websites, attending a webinar, you should really count those things as part of being motivated and connected to your job search, because as you engage in those activities, you're learning more about your industries of interest, and that can contribute to coming across as a stronger candidate for a role. So, just some final thoughts as we're wrapping up. I know this is a really cliche statement, but I feel that it truly brings into, I guess, clarity what we're talking about here. The job search is truly a marathon and not a sprint. And I recognize that this is sometimes difficult to see based on some of the ways that students within the Carlson School of Management get their job. It's hard to see that the estimated time that it takes someone to get a job is 6 to 9 months if you've seen your peers go through the recruiting process in October and have an offer in November. But know that long term and the reality of how people get jobs in the world of work after they leave undergrad is like the process that you're going through now. Many times there aren't career fairs for you to go to as an adult, and you really are left to exploring your resources and networking on your own to find those positions. So remember, 6 to 9 months is average. So if you need that reframe to recognize what this truly looks like, I hope that that's helpful for you and also helps you see why the motivation piece is so important in this process. Lastly, I would say it's always important to take a step back and recognize what's in your control and what's not. And for those of you who ever have an opportunity to to serve on a job search committee, I strongly encourage you to do so. When you are actually reviewing applicants and have access to the information of the applicant pool, you will see how subjective this can be sometimes. You will see how people who are really great fits and who are incredibly qualified just miss the mark because of a unique applicant or another situation, and that truly it is possible to not get a job offer when you have done everything right. And although that may be discouraging, it serves as a reminder to know that sometimes you've done everything that you can do and you just need to keep going. So, again, focus on what's within your control and how you can build confidence within those skills. So, whether that's doing a resume review or a practice interview, or being more open minded and applying to more roles, those are all things within your control that can have a positive impact on your job search process. And as a final reminder, we're here to help you. The UBCC wants to continue to support you in your job search. And remember that you can work with the Undergraduate Business Center up to 3 years after you graduate. So to make an appointment, you can visit this website or you can visit us at z.umn.edu/UBCC.